next section is going to explore contextualising purchased resources. Now, Ian, a lot of RTOs will buy third-party resources or off-the-shelf resources. Why is it important they contextualise them for the use for their specific cohorts? And secondary to that, I just want to clarify, are there any actual third-party products ASQA endorses or signs off or can guarantee compliance on? Because we do see this out in industry.
Firstly, I'd like to say ASQA doesn't endorse any particular third-party resources, but it is mindful of the fact that there are some terrific resources available out there for RTOs to access. It is the RTO's responsibility, though, to ensure that whatever they use is contextualised and is checked, that it is able to meet all the requirements of the training package, and it also satisfies their requirements for their particular strategy for delivering the course. So RTOs should be going through any third-party or purchased resources and undertaking some form of let's call it a validation, to ensure that they are fit for purpose and they're able to meet the requirements of the training package.
What would you expect to see at Audit regarding that check that RTOs will have taken place to ensure it meets the requirements, understanding the onus is on the RTO and they can't simply say, well, I bought them off X, it's on the RTO. So what do you expect to see at Audit?
As you know, ASQA audits are evidence-based, so we would firstly try to find some form of documentation to support that. There might be meeting notes from the group of staff that have gone through and checked those documents. We would also consider talking to the people who were involved in the process to validate that that had occurred. And we would also look at the actual product itself. And oftentimes it's quite clear that there hasn't been any contextualisation or any validation of the tools that they're using. They've merely just grabbed them off the shelf and run them out.
Is it a requirement for industry to be involved in that contextualisation review?
The standards require that RTOs engage with industry in developing up their training assessment strategies, and that would include the resources that they're intending to use. So it is best practice to involve industry at that level to get their, not so much their approval, but their support for the tools that are intended to be used for those particular competency assessment tasks.
Now imagine from contextualisation, a tool may actually be fit for purpose for one type of RTO, one student cohort, yet be very much not the case for those who are in a different environment and the way they're being assessed. Is that something that you look for as far as that contextualisation to meet the individual student cohort?
Yes, certainly in terms of meeting the student cohort, that's one of the problems of using tools when they haven't been contextualised. As you mentioned, they're developed with that particular cohort in mind initially. Prior to actually using the tool, we would suggest that an RTO may consider actually checking the tool for content, also checking that it's going to be relevant to the workplace environment, and consulting with industry to ensure that it's going to address their needs, that the tool will actually fully address all of the training package requirements, that it includes an appropriate level of task difficulty. But with particular reference to the question that you're asking is the system and the process for the collection of evidence as well, because different learner cohorts in different environments, whether it's a simulated environment or a workplace environment or a student who's studying independently through distance learning process, may be able to gather evidence from different sources, and the tool needs to be able to support that evidence gathering process, and that may mean that the tool needs to be contextualised in different ways for those different learner cohorts. It's also important that the tools have clear task instructions, both for the learners, the assessors and any third parties who may participate in that evidence collection process. And we would also suggest that if you're contextualising the tool for a different learner cohort, that the tool is actually trialled to ensure that it's going to be sufficiently engaging, that it will be reliable with regard to the collection of the evidence for those different learner cohorts, and that it's going to be cost effective and that it's going to produce valid evidence. So valid evidence of the requirements as specified in the training package. We would also suggest that you may consider whether or not there are some additional resources that may be required when the tool is being used with different learner cohorts as well.
Would online assessment be an example of what you're just mentioning?
Yes, it is. And with online assessment, the tools should be contextualised prior to actually being, added to a learning management system and made available to learners.
So at RTO, I was diligently reviewing to contextualise third-party materials and finds in the process that the materials do not meet the requirements of the unit. What's your advice?
The RTO may need to consider developing additional assessment tasks for learners or considering alternative sources of evidence in terms of where learners can gather their evidence, for example, through the workplace, rather than actually completing the alternative assessment task. Once again, the alternative evidence or the alternative assessment task and its appropriateness will depend on the learner cohort.
Is it fair to say that some of the training packages have been a long time out of being updated? The RTO as well as ASQA as the regulatory body need to audit against the training package itself. Where there may be terminology that's now out of date and needs to be contextualised, is that part of the contextualisation, working with industry to ensure that the evidence collected does meet both industry needs as well as the training package?
Yes, that's correct.
And what sort of evidence of industry consultation would you expect to see as part of that?
Evidence can form a range of formats, but generally I would see at audit correspondence between the two organisations, evidence of email communication, and often some form of meeting that's been arranged to carry out that process.
Industry may also be involved in actually reviewing the assessment tools prior to implementation as well, to ensure that the assessment evidence that will be gathered will be valid and relevant to current industry requirements.
And they'll often get somebody from industry to come and assist in the validation processes, forming a member of that panel.
Good.